Hello friends! Today I am back and I'm going to be giving you my review of the Shattered Sea Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I'm going to give you guys a really basic overview before moving on to my spoiler-free reviews of books 1, 2, and 3. I will give you guys a heads up when I'm moving from book 1 to book 2 so that if you haven't read the trilogy and you don't want to know anything about book 2, you don't have to be spoiled. Overall, I really loved this trilogy. Joe Abercrombie is a new author to me, and I know that he is very highly lauded within the fantasy community, especially for his first Law trilogy, which is something I will be reading hopefully later this year. I've been recommended his books so many times, and I kind of wanted to have an introduction just to his writing style and his character building, world, etc., so that I kind of knew what to expect. Overall, I cannot tell you how much I love Joe Abercrombie's writing style. It makes me very excited to move on to other books of his, and I just absolutely cannot say enough for his character work, his world building, his writing style is this really beautiful, dark, gritty. It's just a wonderful style of prose, and I really found it to be an easy read. He does a really great job creating characters that are very quickly either relatable or people that you can empathize with, that you care, you're invested in the characters very quickly. Each book has its own main protagonist, but they are all interwoven within each other's story, so it's not like you're getting ripped out of a story and thrown into another when you move from book to book. This trilogy was so many ups and downs for me, and the first book I absolutely loved. I absolutely loved it. Now, that being said, I will say that as I went through the trilogy, I liked the books less. So for me, it was kind of one of those things where I fell in love with the first book and the characters in it. I really got hooked and invested right away. But as I go through the trilogy, it definitely started to unravel a little bit for me. So I felt bad about the ending because I personally had a really hard time with the main protagonist and the story in general. There were some redeeming moments, however, I would definitely say that for me, this series had a downhill slope. So I'm going to give you my review of Half a King, spoiler-free, so that if you're new to this trilogy, you can just watch this bit and I'll give you my thoughts on the first book without giving too much away. So in the beginning of Half a King, we travel to Getland, a fantasy world where Yarvi, who is our main protagonist, is the prince, and he is the younger son of his parents, and he basically in the first chapter of the book discovers that his father and brother have died, and he is now thrust into the spotlight as the heir to the throne of his country. Now, Yarvi is a cripple, and he is missing or has a deformed hand, and so he's not going to be your typical sword-wielding hero, and he knows that, and he's kind of bitter about it. But at the same time, that's really allowed him to kind of craft this very, as Joe Abercrombie calls it many times throughout these books, deep cunning, which basically means that Yarvi is very intelligent. He's been learning about herbal poisoning and all of this different stuff, and also how to manipulate people. Toward the beginning of this book, there's a pretty massive betrayal, and Yarvi is suddenly flung into a world that he has never been a part of, knows very little about, and he's really going to be put to the test. What I love so much about Yarvi is he is actually somebody that I felt very invested in very quickly in this series, and I really connected with him on the level of, you know, there are certain things in life that he's just never going to be able to do, and so he has to rely on the skill set that he's been given to really get himself through some pretty tough situations. And another thing that this book does really well that I loved is the motley crew trope, which is one of my favorite things on the planet. The motley crew that Yarvi kind of assembles throughout this book was absolutely chef's kiss. I loved them so much. There are some fantastic side characters in this book, and it kind of sets the stage really well for book 2. There are a lot of great twists in this novel, and I think especially, you know, people who don't like to read a book where they can predict everything that's going to happen, I really feel like this is a great read. As you can see, it's not a super long book, so it reads very quickly. So yeah, if you're looking for something that has a very dark style feel to it that moves very quickly and is going to give you a lot of twists and turns. Motley crew, really fantastic protagonist. This is a book that I would highly recommend. Now, if you are watching and you have not actually read this trilogy, I'm going to start talking very briefly and as spoiler-free as humanly possible about books 2 and 3 in this trilogy, just to give you a forewarning. So here we go. Moving into book 2, which is Half the World, this is a new protagonist. We are now following a young woman named Thorn Bathu, and she is a swordswoman, and she is a little crazy wildcat, and she does not play well with others. She's very, very, very heavily anti-hero, which is something that I very much love. She's definitely reckless, headstrong, one of those main characters that you kind of have to shake your head at every once in a while because, like, if she would just keep her mouth shut sometimes, it would go a lot better for her. However, it is also her headstrong strength that lends itself very well to the company of characters that she is in eventually, and again we get sucked into kind of a motley crew situation once again, which is kind of spearheaded by Yarvi. He's still kind of what I would consider a side protagonist through this entire series, but Thorn is really where our main perspective comes from. The other character we get to know really well in this book is Brand, who kind of joins this motley crew that Thorn and Yarvi are in, and he is pretty much the exact opposite of Thorn. He's incredibly strong, he is very, very skilled, but he's more of a pacifist at heart and would really love to just be at peace with the world. And these two provide a really fantastic dynamic together, and I just love contrasting characters like this in a story. So even though this book to me wasn't quite as strong, I would say, as the first book, I still very much loved the two main characters and seeing how Yarvi was progressing through this book, and I like the way that Joe Abercrombie shifted perspectives while still really pulling through those characters and themes from book 1. Alright, moving into book 3. In book 3, we once again shift protagonists. Can you tell I don't want to talk about this book? We're going to shift to Skara, who is a young princess turned queen, who is very young, very naive, really doesn't have any kind of experience leading a country, citizens, warriors, etc. And she gets thrown into this very tumultuous situation where there's a lot of different countries very tense and at war with each other, and she's kind of thrown into the table with all of these very seasoned, battle-hardened kings. Now, all of that, I love. Love it all. I think her naivety, but also her willingness to, like, do it scared, for lack of a better term, was really endearing, especially toward the beginning of this book. As the book went along, I felt like Abercrombie kind of leaned a little too heavily on what I felt like were some unrealistic plot devices, and again, I'm not going to say too much about what exactly they were because I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who wants to read it. However, Skara's character to me, especially toward the end, kind of bulldozed everything Joe Abercrombie had built up until this point. And especially at the end, there was a pretty major twist that happens at the very, very end that I felt like kind of undermined everything he had done with one of the characters from the previous books completely, which made me really frustrated and upset. And I really kind of like cast a black shadow over the entire trilogy. That's kind of all I'm gonna say about book 3 because I don't want to spoil any more than I already have. I feel like I've done actually a pretty good job. I'm proud of myself. Final thoughts. Very fabulous introduction to Joe Abercrombie's writing style. I wanted to read something of his before reading the First Law trilogy because that is one that is definitely up on my list to read this year because it is so highly recommended to me as like the father of grimdark, and I'm very excited to read those, and I can see where Abercrombie's writing style is something that I will be able to get into very easily, but just based on what I've read in these books, I really, really love his character work, his world building, which I didn't touch too much on in this review, which I should have. Just really, really beautifully done. The world feels very rich, very old, very real, and it does not take much to get immersed in it, which I really appreciated. If I was reviewing Half a King by itself, and even Half a King and Half the World by themselves, this would have been a overwhelmingly positive review. It was just that last book that really took the trilogy down a huge notch for me. However, I'd really love to hear your comments in the underneath the video about if you've read these, what you thought of them. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel and watching the video. If you have any questions, comments, I'd love to see them down below the video. I hope you have a fabulous week, and I will see you in the next video.